Thank you guys for joining us to the Real Virtual Show. I am your host, Malia Probst. We are streaming live from Los Angeles, and we have Jebb with us in the UK, CEO of Immersively. Thank you for being here, Mr. Jebb.
Thanks for having me, Malia. It's great to be on the show.
I'm very, very happy to have you. So let's kick it off. Let's start off super broad. We're going to kind of talk about news and journalism in virtual reality specifically and where that's kind of go. But let's start off a little bit broader, perhaps. Question about virtual reality in general. Why should we care? Why should we care about virtual reality?
We should care about virtual reality because I think it has the potential to become a platform that replaces everything we now do on a laptop or a tablet. And also because it has tremendous power as a mobile entity as well. So I say it replaces our day-to-day work, but I think ultimately, it's a mobile technology. It's going to be a whole new way to interact with people and also to give feedback to people, what they're doing. I mean, the opportunities for communication have barely been scratched so far. Facebook and Oculus showed some of their latest developments this autumn in Los Angeles, were extremely interesting. And obviously it must be one of the main reasons that Facebook have invested so much money in this area, the social potential.
Absolutely, they certainly have invested quite a bit of money, and I'm sure we'll kind of delve into that in a bit. But then, okay, so this is why we should care about virtual reality in general. This is going to change how humans fundamentally communicate and collaborate across the world. So, about the news, with regards to news, with regards to journalism, this is where you're at. Let me ask you a broader question. Outside of news, before we get to that, what are some other industries that are going to be affected by this technology? What are some other areas of opportunity? What are some other areas of entrepreneurship? Where should we look to see this technology affect?
I think that the two of the really big plays, which aren't the obvious plays, are going to be education and medicine. Maybe they are obvious. I mean, people talk a lot about gaming and about pornography. But I think that two of the areas where we're going to see, as it were, life-changing things is education and medicine.
So how does virtual reality fit with the news? We are deeply, deeply familiar with the 5-second attention span, the incredibly short news cycle, the 24/7 nature of news now. How does VR fit into that topic? How does it fit into news consumption as it stands now, and where do you see it going?
I think its key potential is to fix a broken business model for mainstream media. I mean, one of the problems for mainstream media, whether they're companies that started as newspapers or started as TV channels and, are struggling to get themselves heard in the way that they used to be heard, is that virtual reality is a way not only of attracting a new kind of audience, but also to change the way that news is actually seen. And I think it's something which we can talk about at several levels, because I think virtual reality is very powerful as a medium in itself, whether we're talking about 360 video or where we are using computer-generated recreations for documentary purposes or similar. But I think the massive potential is when you look at virtual reality as a platform for news. So you have it both as a place where you make content, as it were, deliver content, but also as the platform itself. Because one of the ways to fix a broken business model for mainstream news is actually to think about the consumer. And one of the reasons that mainstream companies have got into trouble, to my mind, is what I call the professionalization of the profession. And that is that if you go around newsrooms around the world, however well intentioned, however high-minded, is professional standards, professional rivalry. Be better than the person in the other office, beat your rivals across town. And that's the main focus. And there is peculiarly little focus on the emotional and other effects that news has on people. And so, just talking broadly, you find this mass phenomenon of people who say, I'm too depressed to watch the news, I'm too depressed to read a newspaper. And it is not just because the events themselves may be hideous. Life has always been, hideous and brief. And there's always been, bad things happen. We live in a pretty messy time just now. But there's another level for which reason people don't consume news, and that is the tone with which it's delivered, not just at the tabloid level. And also the fundamental driver for people when they actually sit in a mainstream office, which is to be a great journalist. And I think, well, that's great. Let's all go into the office and be a great journalist. Therefore, what we do is right. But, I've seen so many cases where there's this strange disjunction between the people who make the content and their audience. And when there is a lack of willingness in the people who actually control these old media empires to allow the people who create the content to understand the market. Sounds bizarre, but it's true. And that's one of the main reasons that I started Immersively, is that it's reattract people to news, to make them love news again. And also, ultimately, the big aim is that I think in virtual reality, news can become a source of education, because what it will do is it'll provide a platform where people who look at education as a self-optimized phenomenon, where they're actually taught to educate themselves, by understanding how content is made, and actually mix it into a pedagogic model as well. So news can both become ultimately a form of education, but more importantly, it can reconnect with people in virtual reality, because for two reasons. One, the format itself puts people in the middle of content, something we can talk about, I think, in more detail later. But then secondly, in the virtual reality platform itself, you have a new way of communicating with people. And one of the key communications that has got lost in mainstream media is the effect that the content is having on people. And yet, we live in an age of mature social media. You've thought, there are multiple channels. Yes, but virtual reality takes things to another level. Especially when you're talking about wearable tech and other intuitive ways of communicating with the user. I think that is where the big chance lies with news and virtual reality. So you can get new audiences with this exciting new format. It's a serious journalistic platform. You can tell stories in it. People are moving very rapidly in the storytelling techniques. They're moving rapidly in how to monetize it. But it's as a platform itself as a vehicle for communication with the user. I think that is what's really exciting about news and virtual reality.
Absolutely. I see Immersively is located in the UK, and it's kind of a new media news outlet that says it's news created to take you to the leading edge and keep you there. And you call yourself the platform for news in virtual reality. Could you elaborate just a little bit on what that means, and what exactly does Immersively do?
At the moment, our focus has been on making proof of concept spaces in virtual reality. So making news content in virtual reality, whether it's in video or CGI. Some of it's available on YouTube and other sources. Other is content that we show at conferences. We're about to launch our first travel channel, a series of documentaries about personalities in Los Angeles and what it tells you about the city.
Let me know if you need any. Let me know if you need any input on that subject.
Yeah, well, we'd love some help promoting it when it comes out. That's always very welcome. And what that content will show, I hope, is some new experiments in storytelling in VR. And then, so two things. We're making content either ourselves or co-producing with other people at the moment in video. And also, we've done some proof of concept spaces in CGI to look at how virtual reality can be a platform for news, how people can, as it were, have their own virtual newsroom. So when I say a platform of virtual reality, that's what I'm talking about. This idea of developing an interface where people, content makers and content consumers, actually have a continuous interaction. And we're going to be making announcements about that in the new year. And in the meantime, we'll continue to working either on our own or with friends in the industry to experiment with storytellings and ways of monetizing principally the video content. because you can't develop a VR platform without actually being at the leading edge of the content as well. And so, we have friends both in the United States and Europe who we're working with, and with people who work in the lab environment as well, about the communication between the user and the newsmaker. And some of it is still under wraps, but I'd be very glad to come on again in the new year and tell you more about it when we make our first announcement in that direction.
We would absolutely love that. I would love to have you back, Lewis. It would be an honor, and I would like to delve a little bit deeper into some of the projects that Immersively has completed and that Immersively has worked on. But first, I want to dig a little bit into you. I want to dig a little bit into your background, and I know that you have a long and illustrious career in very traditional printed media, newspapers. Can you tell us a bit about that background, a little bit about that history? How did that lead you to virtual reality, and what was that magic moment for you where you knew virtual reality was where this was going and why you had to go there?
Sure. So I worked for national publications, principally in London, until 2005. And the last large title I worked for was The Independent. And then since 2005, when I was at The Independent, I was usually the go-to person to work at the interface between IT and editorial. So if there was a project that required that interface to work properly, I was the person put in charge. So one of the test projects, the biggest project we did of that sort when I was a staff journalist at The Independent, was to make it the first newspaper that was published in 2 formats every day. So it had started as a broadsheet, and then with 2 weeks warning, we set up a project team to make it a newspaper produced in 2 formats. That added 20% sales to the newspaper in 2003, at a time when all national newspapers, then as now, were seeing massive declines in their circulation.
Just to confirm, that was 20% in 1 year, correct?
Yes, I should have said that, across 1 year, yeah. So it was a time when people were investing heavily in promotions, with CDs and things like that, which was sort of largely money down the drain. So that actually changed the market position of The Independent. Subsequently, I became the interface with outside consultants when the newspaper was redesigned as a tabloid first, as it were. And I saw that this was something that I would like to do myself. So I left in 2005, set up as a consultant. It so happens that the most interesting project, which is relevant to our discussion today, that I have done in the last 10 years, was to be part of the launch team for a new national newspaper owned by The Independent called which now sells 300,000 copies a day. And when it was launched, people said this will last 3 weeks. And the reason it worked was twofold. One, they had done some research that showed there were 300,000 people who wanted a serious newspaper where the content was brief and they weren't patronized politically. And also because in 2010, the whole world was on social media for the first time. And I say the whole world, I mean all generations. So what happened was that the newspaper, which they expected to appeal to big city, younger people, appealed to the whole country. And so ever since it was launched, it sold in every single shop in the United Kingdom and has continued to do so. And so that was one of the, as it were, the learnings that got me to launch Immersively. And that is that if you actually communicate with your audience as a large media outlet, it's amazing what you can do. And then the reason and the point is, I think that can become far more sophisticated and far more profound once we're working in virtual reality. So 2013-14, I joined for the first time a Facebook mastermind group in Los Angeles, led by a remarkable social entrepreneur called Lewis Howes, who has a big social media following, an excellent podcast, and has recently launched a book called The School of Greatness, which is the name of his podcast as well. And I find a very interesting way of meeting people from around the world who, like me, were looking to launch new businesses, looking for new people to collaborate with. It's a great talking shop. It's a great meeting place, very interesting people. And Lewis Howes is a remarkable leader in this regard. And then one day he did a key thing. He said, he had a webinar and he said, in the next 30 seconds, I want everybody to write in the window what you want to achieve by June 2014. And And I wrote, I want to start my own media company. And then I thought, wow, where did that come from? But this is an important point, because it's when you're put on the spot that you behave instinctively. And then I talked to trusted allies in this field. And then one of the friends I spoke to said, I've just spent Christmas with my family and my daughter, and we didn't watch the news once because we all found it too depressing. And I thought, well, that is a problem that needs solving. So it started as a simple WordPress site. And the key point about that site was creating interesting ways for the content makers to interact with the content consumers. And it was all to do with mood, and your mood before and afterwards, and sharing your mood history with other users. And so we were working with that, and it was proving very interesting. And we had presented the site live on Skype to Canada and done a lot of interesting tech sort of experiments with it. And then April 2014, Facebook bought Oculus Rift, and I thought, well, there's the final thing for, this is going to be the platform where we can actually have that communication that we need to make people care about news, and also to understand their mood. In other words, what is the emotional effect of all this content? And that was an absolutely key moment, because I thought, not only is this a fascinating field in itself for making content, but by putting people at the heart of it and using it as a platform, we've got a great opportunity to actually make this happen. And also, to put it bluntly, it was a much more interesting business proposition than doing something interesting with a WordPress site. And so ever since then, we've been experimenting and putting out news content in VR. And it's been a fascinating time to be involved, because I didn't realize the extent to which we were still at the pioneer stage. I mean, I thought that other stuff would come out more quickly than it did, put it that way.
Right.
And then in October 2014, we decided to film the pro-democracy demonstrations in Hong Kong. And we showed it in London in December 2014. And then, by a strange serendipity, the day we launched it as the first as live news documentary in 360 video, it's the same day that that Chris Milk and his company released 2 documentaries for 2 of his collaborators, Vice.com and United Nations. And so, it felt like, the timing was right. And that this very distinguished filmmaker, who's been a wonderful leader in this regard and speaks so well about news in VR as well, and is such a serious filmmaker, it was great to have come out on the same day, as it were. And Hong Kong Unrest has been a great calling card for us. And in the side of where we've been working 360-degree video, and we've had a lot of interest through it. And the nice thing is, mostly with the industry, as it were, with other newsmakers and with people in China, and with tech companies, people who want to know about how do you make it, what does it cost, how do you edit it, the actual technicalities as well. And it's been, as I say, a fascinating calling card. And when I came to Los Angeles in September, I hooked up with a lot of the great pioneers over there, Noni de la Peña and the guys from Gannett. The guys from Gannett launched this amazing documentary called Harvest of Change in September 2014. That was a real first. And of course, Noni had really started it all, along with Palmer Luckey, when they took their food documentary about Los Angeles to Sunset. And that was, where Oculus Rift came from. So it's great to hook up with all of them, and to realize as well that we're still at the very early stage. As somebody said at a conference in New York in October, these are the good old days of news in virtual reality. It's the time that people will look back at. And it's partly to do with, establishing the lexicon of storytelling, but more to the point is, the way the tech is going to go is going to be quite, there's so much that we cannot predict. And what was so thrilling about Oculus Connect last autumn in Los Angeles was to hear the naked passion of these brilliant people who run that company, and the generosity with which they shared their thoughts and their findings. So it's very interesting when a huge company like that, Facebook, Oculus, shows its wares, because it's inspiring, and it also, and it's just exciting to think that already a lot has been achieved, but there's so far to go, and so there's a massive amount of opportunity to do interesting things. And it's a wonderfully created it's a wonderfully creative stage for news and virtual reality, I'd say, and people are very interested. And the great thing is, you go to conferences and you don't feel the need to apologize, put it that way. In other words, there are plenty, there are a lot of questions which we can come to when you want to, about ethics, which is a massive subject and which I think can be dealt with quite briefly as well. But in a way that, to me, it's one of the most fascinating topics to do with this. But I think the answers to it are sometimes simpler than people realize. But also, there's this great undertow of excitement as well. And, when people say, okay, what's the adoption pattern for this? Imagine you're in a meeting with a VC now, and they say, how many people are going to be using it in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months? What are they going to be using? Well, it's completely missing the point, because there are so many different levels at which people can both produce content, in terms of cost, sophistication, and type. There's so many levels at which people can consume, starting from the cheapest possible Android phone all the way up to whatever becomes the winner in the console-driven headset wars. I don't think it needs to be a winner, but just in terms of sophistication and long-term cost, there are so many levels of entry, and I think that is why people needn't be too concerned. And then, as one of our audience quite rightly wrote in the chat thing early on, the amount of money that the big boys are putting into this means that things are not going to stand still. And this is important, because at any stage, with a new technology like this, if things become static, that's when things can go wrong. And I don't see it going static, as it were. In fact, Google and Facebook, and we haven't even heard from Apple yet. We know you can see their job hires in the recent months.
What do you think Apple's up to? So what do you think they're working on? I
don't know, but what you do know is that they have Apple TV, of course, and you have to think very hard about that. That for them is massive, Apple TV. How, in terms of interface or headset or whatever it might be, your guess is as good as mine. I think, the fact that they're taking their time, perhaps means it's going to be, even more interesting than we imagine. I was talking to somebody from Apple the other day, and they weren't in that department, and nor would I have pressed them to tell me what they were doing, and nor did they know, because they're in another department. But as everybody, I think listening to this knows, everybody's just watching that space, because if at any stage the industry needs an injection, it'll come with that. But in the meantime, things aren't standing still with, as it were, the people who are coming at the other tech giants. Think about the three, as it were, biggest, the most high-profile companies in the world are all investing huge amounts in VR. And so it's fantastically exciting. And that, is why there's a business case for getting into this market, to put it bluntly.
Well.
It scales up the whole world, the whole universe.
It does. It will continue to scale up. I think that's a great way of putting it. And as you mentioned, it's such a wonderful time for journalism and news in virtual reality right now. Big names like Gannett that you mentioned, the New York Times, and their recent collaboration with Google and distributing 1 million cardboard headsets. That was pretty enormous. Yeah. New York Times also debuted their first virtual reality documentary about the displaced, which is the stories of 3 children, 3 refugees who've been displaced by war. You mentioned Nani de la Peña with Project Syria, and these kind of really illustrious filmmakers are getting into the game. It's a very exciting time for this particular type of content. And as you've been pointing out, I think that this approach and this perspective with regards to recognizing emotions and having cognizance of the empathy of this medium is going to be enormous in sort of driving this. And great times for news and virtual reality in general. And I want to kind of delve into one of your projects specifically. and it's a 360 video, Hong Kong Unrest. And you mentioned it a bit before, but I'd love to unpack that. It's called Hong Kong Unrest. How did you film this? Can you tell us a little bit about this video?
Sure. It was filmed by Edward Miller, our head of visuals, in October 2014. It was filmed by a one-man crew. So he did the filming, the interviews, the audio, everything. And we had been, at the time, we had already developed 2 proof of concept spaces in computer-generated graphics, and a mixture of computer-generated graphics and video. And we were sitting in the room, and I said, what we need now is a live event where we can put people at the heart of things. This is not something that anyone had done at that stage. But I thought this is the real interest, is what's it like if you're in the middle of something and people can be. And so we started thinking about public protests. We were in London, so there was a demonstration about health cuts, social service cuts. We thought, okay, that's quite interesting. And then it was Edward's idea to go to Hong Kong, which had been in the news, but for at least a month by then, the umbrella protests. And so, but a week later, we'd already been there for 3 days and filmed it. And how did he film it? He did the classic thing of 6 GoPros, Hero 3s, on a Freedom 360 block, which is still, as it were, the best. Well, we can go back onto that, but it's still the most practical and cost-effective way of making a 360 video. We can come to live broadcast later, everyone. And then he did the post-production. We then recorded a voiceover in a studio in London with an actor friend, Alex Hope. Did a very nice job. And then we showed it to the VR community in London on Oculus Rift. And at the time, there was no YouTube support and no Facebook support for video. So when we launched it, we created our own microsite called hongkongunrest.com. And that's how we released it. And we also put out an Oculus download for the developer community. We're talking January 2015. There was no retail Oculus Rift. There was no YouTube support, no Facebook support. Come March 2015, YouTube started supporting 360 video. We put it straight up, and it's had 85,000 hits without us investing at all in promotion. And YouTube have been following it very carefully. They've been very interested in how we put it together. And the key thing, what we wanted to prove was that we could do a serious short news documentary at low cost. And how do you do it? Now, it was an interesting news event, the umbrella protest, because if you remember, it was magnificently organized by the protesters. They had this great community of people working on laptops out in the open air in one of the centers of protest. They had very engaged and intelligent organizers. So it meant that we had great connection in terms of covering the stories, getting interviews, getting in the right place, being able to vantage points to film, and general support for a one-man crew, which is important. And of course, like anybody asking somebody to go and film a story where, there's a degree of, there's a question of safety, because it was a protest and batons were used and tear gas was used. And one of the main scenes, Edward, had to wear a mask against the use of the gas. But in fact, thanks to the intelligence of the organisers of the protests and to be honest, the restraint of the police, it was, everything went off okay in terms of the safety of our one-man crew, and which is always your first concern when you're asking somebody to film anything. And then also in terms of getting to speak to people, we didn't show anyone on camera because there was a question of illegal proceedings or anything else that they might become engaged in. All our interviewees preferred to remain anonymous. So what we did was that we filmed a lot of live action, and then we used a voiceover and the interviews to create the storytelling.
There are a couple of moments in Hong Kong Unrest that gave me goosebumps. And it's a very, very powerful way of being at this enormous protest and seeing it unfurl and get bigger over the course of a couple of days. And one of the moments where I just got goosebumps, Lewis, was when the filmmakers mentioned that the crowd, the protesters, started singing Happy Birthday in order to antagonize the police. And you just heard the swell of people singing Happy Birthday in English to the police to antagonize them. I just got this amazing moment that I never would have had before. I never would have had access to that kind of potentially iconic moment. And then at the end of the video, it shows us the crowd, the protesters, tons of them in tents, all set up around the street, and they're all holding candles, and they're singing together. And there are just these beautiful moments in this video that brought that protest, that pro-democracy protest in Hong Kong, truly to life for me, which never would have been able to be brought to life like that. So I was, those particular moments I really enjoyed. I thought it was a really effective piece of storytelling, and I'm looking forward to more of these amazing productions coming out that can heighten our awareness to other people and other perspectives and other events all around the world. We have a great question here from Aaron, and it's a very practical question. I like that. And he says, other than the cost of hardware, what is the biggest hurdle a new 360 videographer needs to overcome?
If we're talking about stitching video, it's the skill, it's the investment in the software as well, and also in developing skill in stitching, because all the stitching software continues to improve very rapidly, but you're still going to need to do some manual work to get a great video. So Malia, should we now get onto the whole thing of, it's a very good point that Aaron makes about hardware, talking about the options on hardware. I can talk about that.
Absolutely. But
maybe we should start with what I call the classic GoPro rig, which everybody used to film Hong Kong Unrest. So yes, it's the cost of the cameras, the cost of, if you're able to 3D print your block, then that's fine. You're saving a lot of money.
Quite a bit of money.
There's obviously the cameras themselves. Obviously, there are some alternatives to GoPro. The latest GoPros, there's a lot of problems with overheating, GoPro 4. And then there's the time and cost of post-production of stitching. So that's with a rig where you've got, say, you're filming 6 or 7 channels of video, and you're stitching it typically in Color software, which now it belongs to GoPro, that company. And so the big challenge is now where do you invest in cameras? In other words, do you go for the GoPro option, knowing that there are a lot of cameras either already on the market or coming onto the market which promise to stitch live and to take out a lot of the post-production time and cost? And so I think you can see it as it were, 3 levels. The bottom level is bubble cameras that stitch live, and the latest Ricoh Theta, the S, actually streams for 20 minutes to its own app. And they're working with Facebook and YouTube to stream directly to those social media platforms. And I think if you watch Facebook, you'll see that they will announce it as soon as they're able to do that. So the advantages are speed, cheapness, but there's no manual intervention if some of the stitching is bad. But obviously, you're dealing with live content. Then what they call mid-range is the kind of GoPro setup we were just talking about, where the challenge is the production lead time. So what you do is you can film up to 4K. So that the footage, if necessary, you can at festival level, you're going to be able to show something really fantastic. Obviously, you're going to have to save it down for mobile and make it a much smaller file. And then there's a whole question of live broadcast at the upper end. So live broadcast at the upper end is going to be very interesting. The moment it's incredibly expensive. If you ask me now to film a live event, you'd probably rent 3 Ladybug cameras, which are professional level cameras, and then you can have a live black box where you can actually edit live between 3 360 streams. We're talking mid 5 figures for, say, covering a music festival or something, But that's with 3 cameras, where you can properly edit triple feeds. And then, of course, the thing that's been most in the news recently on that score is the Nokia Ozo, which was launched last week in Los Angeles. And what made people's eyes go out of stalks was the price, $60,000. Because, I know several people who were there, including fairly hard people who are very connected with making content and branding content and everything. In other words, they know what things cost. And one of my friends thought that somebody said 16,000, which was still about twice what they expected, but no, 60. So ultimately, the model on which most people are going to use that setup is rental at the moment as well. And then, of course, you can connect with Jaunt VR if you're a big publisher and, pay it. And, there's a similar investment to renting one of these cameras. So I would say that GoPros aren't going to be the only solution. There are other people, with cameras of that sort, which you could build your own rig to. Increasingly, I think I would build my own block and 3D print it because some of the ones in the market are great, but they're pretty expensive. And it's all about the post-production in terms of the cost, because I think somebody, if you can set up a low-cost post-production pipeline, as it were, as companies like Video do in Los Angeles, that you can either work with other people or do your own content fairly rapidly, i.e. within 24 hours. That's, at the moment, I would say, is still the option to follow. And then in the meantime, I've got a friend and collaborator testing the Ricoh Theta S in Los Angeles. And they work in the health sphere. So be very interested to see, how the stuff looks. And I hope that we'll be putting out some, and if you like, Malia, we can come on to the potential for those bubble cams, editorially. But I think, it all depends on, who you want to get to and with what sort of impact. I think for a lot of people, including these organizations, why wouldn't you use a bubble cam? I mean, just like why wouldn't you use your iPhone to report from a refugee queue in Hungary, as AJ Plus does? I mean, it seems absolute sense. And so why wouldn't you use a Ricoh Theta S, all things, if you test it before and you're happy with its performance and everything, then why wouldn't you use that to do, as it were, citizen journalism immediacy, where you're able to capture something which you're not expecting, which is the basic, at the moment, everybody has smartphones are more or less everywhere, so all this footage is captured. Question is, how quickly will 360 bubble cams streaming either to something like Periscope or to Facebook or to YouTube, when will they get mass adoption? Because then it's going to be interesting to see what kind of channels one can set up. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for local news reporting and for people to make impactful things about their environment. I think that's one of the obvious things for the, $400 bubble cam like the Ricoh Theta S.
I have a funny story that I think you'll appreciate, Lewis. The launch of the Nokia Ozo was last Monday here in Los Angeles, and I went to it. Mm-hmm. And so at the big unveiling, when the CEO is up there on the stage, when all of the pretty neon lights are going, all the, it's the theatricality of it was fantastic. Mm-hmm. But as the CEO is talking, I look in the front row of the Nokia Ozo launch event, and there's a guy on a Ricoh Theta S taking the content.
Very good. That says it all. Exactly. Opposite ends of the market. So yes. Did you find it was very much aimed at Hollywood, that launch event? Really?
The launch event, yes, I found very, very aimed at Hollywood. They definitely emphasized the old train metaphor about, which, the trope that you're familiar with, I'm sure. But for the rest of us, the first time audiences saw, the first time movies happened, the first time film goers saw a train on a film screen, they put their hands up as though the train is going to run them over. Yeah. And so that moment of magic, we're in that moment of magic. We're in that moment of shock and awe with virtual reality right now. And Nokia definitely emphasized that point. Absolutely. They also definitely emphasized who or what is going to be the next, what's going to be the next Citizen Kane of virtual reality. And it was definitely quite geared towards Hollywood in my experience. But again, the theatricality was amazing. And they put on quite a show, I will tell you that. But this guy filming with a Ricoh S Theta in the front row of the Nokia Ozo launch event was just such sweet, sweet irony that I've been endlessly entertained about that every single time I've thought about it for the last week. And just to kind of reframe this context for you guys, the Ricoh S Theta is a very small 360 camera. The price point is under $400. I think it's about $360, and it can capture 360 video, and it doesn't require stitching. So it's a really, really viable option for pre-visualization of 360 scenes. It's a really good way to kind of get your feet wet, maybe kind of start playing around with it. And I definitely think that we're going to see the technology get cheaper and cheaper. That's what tends to happen. And so the $60,000 price tag of the Nokia Ozo was shocking to a lot of the people, a lot of the industry experts, a lot of people who have been in VR for a very long time. There was a lot of sticker shock at that event, and people were kind of speculating as to how much it was. And when it was finally unveiled, let's just say the highest price that I had heard, the highest speculation that I had heard before the $60,000 was announced, was $50,000. So when the $60,000 price tag was announced, there were definitely some jaws that hit the floor on that one. But it is definitely an enterprise solution. It's going to be for big studios, for big companies, and exactly what you said, Lewis. This is going to be a great way for rentals. I think we're going to see some traction here in the rental field, in the rental industry. And then I also think for venue owners that own big venues and make a lot of money in live events, I could definitely see why investing in one of these Ozos at this point in time, maybe you wouldn't recoup the cost of that one Ozo, but with the brand awareness and infrastructure created around utilizing the technology, I think could pay for itself in the long run. Let's see. Hey, Lewis, I have lost you.
Okay, so Maria, I'd like to address one thing when they dropped off earlier was Aaron was asking about, do any of the cameras support positional audio? And so I put a note in the window about VisiSonics. Very, very interesting camera, which is audio first. And it seems to me they developed the tech audio first and then the camera. And it's partly derived from the importance of, the fact that audio is even more important in VR than it is in 2D, as it were. And there was a session at StoryNext in New York in October when one of the founders of VisiSonics was talking. And the fundamental, genius of their approach is being able to filter out multiple sound channels in any particular, and there could be thousands at a time, and actually deal with the actually deal with not just, as it were, direct sound, but sound bouncing off surfaces as well, because you've got to be able to filter out and emphasize the sound that you want to hear most. And so it seems to me the best approach so far to positional audio that I've come across. When we made a performance from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, and what we did there is we filmed the actors in a studio. We had green screened the whole studio. We then green screened them into another space. And when we were recording the actors, they each wore a lavalier. And then we placed the audio in Unity so that we put video into a Unity space and we green screened the video. And of course, there's plenty of plugins in Unity for making audio positional. But the VisiSonics approach seems to me the best and most interesting so far, and we'd love to work with them on capturing live and getting the positional audio to an astonishing standard. And I think everybody should watch their space very carefully, because, as I said before, audio in VR is even more important than it is in traditional filmmaking. The old saw about you can make a great movie, you can make a great, bad pictures don't ruin a movie, but bad audio sure does. And likewise in VR, if you don't have decent audio, you haven't got decent content. And it's so, it has this additional power, but, this whole thing of position. And then something I was saying earlier, which I'm not sure whether I was on or off, was that, when you're filming in 360 spherical video, I think you have to re-choreograph your whole mind about, where things are, both in terms of picture and audio. And so you're not directing to a single frame, you're directing to an entire universe. And what is, we've done one, as I mentioned before, we've done one experiment with drama already. And we're also now looking at doing some more contemporary drama, perhaps even better suited to VR, but also, to actually commissioning people to write directly for VR, for drama in VR. Because, to work with the right creative team in terms of the sound and the position, and the visuals for drama. So, I've set up a mini consortium to do that. We're not sure we're going to first make it, but I think maybe one of the great modernists, and then to get somebody to write something specifically. And it'll be just a question of working with the right tech as well. So maybe if we could work with VisiSonics on that, I think that could be a big jump forward for drama in VR.
So do you think that virtual reality is the future of broadcast television? How have publishers like YouTube affected things? Like what does the success of YouTube indicate?
Well, I think that it's a whole new form of broadcasting. I don't think it has to replaced, as it were, traditional broadcasting, or however you're consuming it, whether it's on Apple TV or on the internet or whatever, however it's being cast to you, it doesn't have to replace the traditional frame. But the great thing is it gives you a new way of examining a story. So one of the things that we're going to be doing, is we actually test creating a story in 2D against creating a story in VR, and what's the different effect. And I think if people are to understand the effect that VR content is going to have on people, they've got to actually do a comparison. You can't just say, oh, this is what VR is going to do. In other words, part of our becoming a platform is actually doing proper experimentation in this regard.
Beautiful. So we are at the beginning of the beginning of the beginning. Virtual reality has been bubbling quietly away for decades. However, in regards to mass adoption and regards to getting to mainstream, we're at the beginning of the beginning. Yeah. So how do we get there? How do we make virtual reality great? How do we get to that great point? How do we get to this, to be the medium that people consume with and through? How do we get there?
Well, I think the key thing is not to rely on a single level of adoption, as it were. So the great thing is you don't have to say everybody's got to have an Oculus Rift, everybody's got to have a Sony Morpheus, everybody's got to have a Samsung VR gear. I think the key thing about mass adoption, as I've said before, is that it can be enough just to have your cell phone and single screen it. The next stage is having a cardboard and putting your mobile phone in it. The next thing is a better cardboard with better lenses. The next thing is Samsung Gear VR. The next thing is a tethered, console-based headset. So I think the key thing is that people should make content, with a reason. I think if VR and news in VR in particular is going to take off, what you can't have is people making virtual reality for the sake of virtual reality. It still needs to have a reason. If you're going to put something out, make sure that you've got a good story to tell and it's something interesting. And some of the stuff that's been put out by some of the big bodies is surprisingly, how can I put it, experimental. And the problem there is people say, oh, that's great, but I haven't learned anything from it or whatever. And so I think the key thing is to avoid treating this platform as a gimmick. So it's up to us content makers to make sure that we make interesting, content with intention. As somebody said to me the other day, we need pano with purpose. I didn't make that up, but but it was somebody who's been an innovator in the past and a great innovator. So and this is, it's very important. I mean, one of the things that people said at StoryNext in New York in October is the worst thing can happen is that people just make news content for the sake of it in VR. There has to be a reason. And the great thing is, why not experiment with storytelling, but why not actually decide not to put something out if you're not happy with it? In other words, it's much better to be happy to put out than just produce stuff for the sake of it. Because I think it's important that the people who already have the reach, the big companies, they have a big opportunity here. And so it's up to them, to be very circumspect about what they put out. And, it's been encouraging so far what Gannett put out in the New York Times, two very big publishers, because they've chosen carefully what they put out. That, there's a purpose behind it. And they don't just say, oh, God, we did the 360 this, we did 360 that. There needs to be a purpose. And then I think the key thing also is it's foolish to waste too much time saying this is when we're going to get mass adoption. If I'm sitting in front of a VC, we can talk about it, as it were. But the key thing is things are moving very fast. And the key thing is just to keep watching how things are being adopted and adapting to it. Because if you say, right, I've got a 3-year business plan, we're going to make this kind of content there, this kind of content then, it's impossible to predict the way the software, let alone the hardware, is going to go. And so I think people are going to be pivoting in how they tell stories and how they monetize a great deal in the next 2 or 3 years. But, to come back to the amount of investment that's coming from the 3 most famous companies in the world for anything means, I think, that there's going to be a universe to work in. Who controls it and who wins, I don't know. But I think it's going to be enough for them that there could be a lot of win.
Let me know about it.
But you're in the right city to find out. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Somebody's coming in.
All right.
Our friend.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Very exciting. Way to go. Gaurav.
Hey, hi.
Gaurav, hi.
Yeah. Hi. So I'm a VR developer, basically AR and VR. So I develop content. So yes, you said it right. Developing content with a reason.
Yeah.
That's the whole important point. Yeah. Without a reason, it will not sustain. Yeah. The content will not be supported. But I am, so actually at the moment I develop applications for basically for brands. But when you're saying, because as you go in for filmmaking and documentaries, all set different thinking. Because VR is a medium. What is filmmaking is also about a grammar. It's about the understanding of the scenario. So, I mean, I'll tell you, I meet a lot of filmmakers who are seriously, they are enthusiastic about making films in VR. Because it's all, I'll tell you, in fact, what I really believe is I guess filmmaking will be the most benefited one for the long lasting times, I guess, for the longer ones. One of the reason of, because it will be more of consumer version fast as compared to other things coming on a consumer version, it will be fast. My question comes down to is, okay, I was just telling you, so my question comes down to is, okay, my question comes down to is which of the cameras, you said, rig is one of the things. If you have heard of Griptic, because we're really planning to buy one of the 360-degree camera instead of just taking the rig and stitching, because it's a lot of work and also the algorithm to work on. I know, I'll tell you, it's because once we, what happens is for our, we have to weather with the timelines. We need to deliver with the timelines for brands. Okay, especially for the events, the musical concerts. So we were looking out which of the cameras is best for which can stitch it automatically. So I thought I'll ask you with your experience, because you would have experience with a lot of other cameras to play with. So there is one camera which has come down known as Lucid, Lucid. They had I don't know how, because that's in their area. They have just come down. I want to know how is it, if you know anything about that.
I haven't spoke to anyone who's used it, I'm afraid. We haven't used it, and I haven't spoken to anyone who has. But I could ask around. What stage is it at? Is it is it very new, or what? How long has it been out?
So they have been going around in trade shows. They have just raised funding from crowdfunding platform Indiegogo.
Yeah.
But they have been doing a lot of, in the Western side, they have really got a lot of trade shows and all sort of stuffs. So I really want to know what about it, because the price point is very low as compared to other
what
cameras.
is it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's about, if I'm not wrong, it's about $200, something like that, $200, $300.
Okay.
And an automatic stitching. And then the second camera is Gyroptic. If that is pretty little old than this, it's
Gyroptic.
Yeah. Gyroptic. Yeah.
If I was looking to go at the price point of Lucid, I would still go with Ricoh Theta, because I think they're going places, and I think it'd be a good universe to be in, put it that way. And they've got massive support from the main platforms as well. Because the thing about, I'm not trying to be their salesperson, and I'm still waiting to see our first footage from LA with it, but they are, they're collaborating with both Facebook and YouTube, so you can put your stuff straight up on there for your browse. And so
I have actually seen some of the footage from it, and I was very surprised at I thought that I was going to be not impressed, but I was impressed because of how small the device is, and because of the price point. Because the price point is so low, I was very impressed when I got to see already stitched together 360 footage that was taken from 5 minutes before.
Yeah. So was this an S, Malia? Was it the latest one, the live streaming one?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, it was the Ricoh Theta S.
Cool. I think you have your answer, Gora.
Yes, absolutely.
I can't see any reason not to go for them if you want that instant, and if you're happy with it's much higher definition than the old model.
Yeah, I honestly, I was shocked at the quality for the price point. So we have to wrap it up here. But really quickly, Lewis, where is virtual reality and news going? Where is it going? And when is live streaming coming into the picture?
Live streaming, do you say? Or...
Yes, live streaming. When is the marriage of live streaming and virtual reality going to come together, and how do you see those joining? What does it look like at the intersection of live streaming, virtual reality, and the news?
I would say we're going to see an awful lot of it in the next 6 months. Just look at the big news groups who've got the budget to, as it were, rent 3 Nokia Ozos so that they've got broadcast quality. They can manage 3 positions at an event, which is the minimum you want if you're a proper TV station. And I would have thought, I'd watch the 3 of the biggest news groups in the United States. I've been trying to interest people in the UK and Europe in it, and I'm sure they've got their own plans. But I think that in terms of live broadcast, I think it's simply a question of what kind of event you go for. You obviously, I think they're well, by definition, if you're planning a live broadcast, the event's going to happen so that you can set up. I think that one of the things is going to, as well, knock the ball out of the park is when we see a lot more live sport coverage in 360 from NextVR and other people, and from people who are actually going to be able to render sports events direct into CGI so that you can actually run onto the pitch with the players, even though they've been rendered as CGI. For that reason, you'll be able to go on. So funnily enough, I think that we're going to see some interesting stuff live for news. And then I think where the big money is in sport, obviously, which is a branch of news. But I think that is going to set some standards. Now, of course, the point about sport is that it's in a stadium where you can have cameras in special positions to make it special, as it were. And I think that in terms of news, sort of hard news, current affairs, it's just a question of, we've done our own matrix of what sort of stories we think are best covered in 360 and which aren't. And it's a question of going to the right event and be wearing just putting a camera under people's nose and saying, let's leave the cameras there. Isn't this fun? If you're going to do a live broadcast, I think you need several camera positions. You've got to edit live using a black box and using a pro player, such as the one I described that that the Ladybug cameras work with. And then, so I think we're going to see a lot of that in the next 6 months, but just at very specific events. And in the meantime, our smaller companies will be experimenting with telling stories, I think principally in what I call the features documentary area. The thing is, if we're going to do live broadcasts, I think you've either got to say, we are the AJ plus of VR. Why not? We're going to have a lot of these theatre S's and we're going to have people running around with them and they're going to be live streaming. Or also going to say, we're going to do very cool, considered features documentary where we actually exploit the medium very carefully. And we actually think, we think about how we're going to tell stories. Because there's two ways to do it. You can just do, this is amazing cat dry, I'm running along and I can see people screaming or whatever with my theatre S, and that's great. And then there's what I call the planned slower pace documentary filmmaking. And at that latter, both of those two are open to everybody. Live broadcasts, it all depends on your budget. Live, if you've got the budget to use the top end cameras, then why wouldn't you? And if you don't, just use the Theatre S. I mean, we've all seen enough of an example of how citizen journalism mixes in with, big time, as it were, mainstream media. And same thing will apply with VR.
Beautiful. Lewis, Jebb, CEO of Immersively, where can we find you? Where should we go to find out more about you? Where should we go on the internet? We have a website, which you can find under immersively.com. And that will soon be transforming itself into a connected website relating to all our content. At the moment, it's a landing page, but soon the full Immersively story is a website about the company and about the industry and connecting with our content there and on big social media platforms. So we're seeing that by January 2016. Beautiful. And Lewis is also on Twitter at JebbL. Jebb, thank you. Mr. Jebb, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you being with us today and look forward to seeing you again.